As an American who's very invested in this economy, just as a consumer, trying not to watch the markets too much these last few days.
More meetings for Donald Trump. Another day, another meeting in the Oval Office. This time, NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte. The president keen to hammer home the idea that the US will annex Greenland from Danish control. In this exchange, Rutte seems to tell Donald Trump to keep NATO out of any Greenland discussion.
Well, I think it'll happen, and I'm just thinking, I didn't give it much thought before, but I'm sitting with a man that could be very instrumental. You know, Mark, we need that for international security, not just security, international. We have a lot of our favorite players, cruising around the coast, and we have to be careful. And we'll be talking to you. It's a very appropriate, really a very appropriate question.
There's an issue in the high north, so the Arctic. So what you did. So when it comes to Greenland, yes or not joining the US, I would leave that outside for me, this discussion, because I don't want to drag NATO in that.
Yeah, I mean, look, Mark Rutte, not having any of that, Anita. We should reference, of course, Greenland's centre-right party has won the election there in the last few days. Donald Trump is clear. He thinks the US will annex Greenland, though. Why does he keep pursuing on this line, do you think?
Well, he has outlined his reasons that there are critical minerals, that it's strategically located, and this plays into what Trump has kind of outlined as his foreign policy in his second term, which is kind of a revamped Monroe Doctrine, which is this idea of U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. That's also in line with what he said about the Panama Canal. It is interesting to note that the Secretary of General of NATO was put on the spot a little bit there because, of course, Greenland falls under Denmark, and Denmark is a NATO member. So one wonders what would happen if the U.S. exerted any force over Greenland, because would that not trigger some sort of Article 5 response from NATO?
Which is why actually Rutte handled it pretty carefully and said, well, it's kind of got nothing to do with me. I'm going to stay out of this discussion. And that's why it was canny of Trump to mention it. Of course he was going to mention it. He wasn't going to ignore that fact, was he?
Sure. I mean, this has definitely been on Trump's mind. And there are, there's a lot to like about Greenland from the American perspective in terms of what it holds, in terms of resources. But the fact remains it belongs to Greenlanders. And unless they choose differently and they choose to change their allegiances, I think it remains up to Greenlanders right now.
We've heard more from Donald Trump on Canada again today. Tariffs were a talking point between the pair. Trump said he won't bend to Canada in their ongoing trade war.
Look, we've been ripped off for years, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore. No, I'm not going to bend at all. Aluminum or steel or cars, we're not going to bend. We've been ripped off as a country for many, many years. We've been subjected to costs that we shouldn't be subjected to. In the case of Canada, we're spending $200 billion a year to subsidize Canada.
How do you think this will play out over the next week or so? It seems to change every day, doesn't it? The steel and aluminium tariffs for the moment. We know that all other tariffs are on pause, aren't they? Certainly from Canada's perspective. But that will run out in a few weeks. Where does both sides or either side go in this discussion?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, because Trump in that very discussion in the Oval Office reiterated his view that Canada should be the 51st state. So he's really kind of flexing his rhetorical muscles here and trying to dominate the discussion and indeed trying to dominate the nation of Canada. It's hard to say where it's going to go. I mean, Trump keeps saying, I'm not going to bend on tariffs, and then he bends. So, I mean, I think it would be foolish to predict the future here. Of course, Canada's incensed. The Premier of Ontario at first threatened to cut off electricity supplies, and then he bent. So we may see some bending and unbending and bending and unbending and straightening over the next, who knows? And I mean, I think this is expected and something that Trump also predicted would happen because he is negotiating. He's just negotiating in public. I think the reason that we're maybe surprised to see these vicissitudes is that this is all happening so publicly rather than as is customary behind closed doors.
Yeah, certainly. how are the markets looking today? We've seen a response from them, of course, to these tariffs, and so far Donald Trump hasn't necessarily given a knee-jerk reaction, or some people might question that, or raise that as one of the reasons why he's pulled back a little bit on some of the tariffs, or been able to put a pause on what's happening for the majority of Canadian goods into the US. But how long can Trump, carry on with sustained pressure from the markets, from the financial markets?
I mean, that's a great question that I don't have an answer to. And, as an American who's very invested in this economy, just as a consumer, trying not to watch the markets too much these last few days, but let me just summarize that they have taken a serious hit. It's not just the New York Stock Exchange; it's all of the indices that are suffering. But who knows how long this can go on and what it's going to take to bring it back up. Of course, the Trump White House has said that this is transitory, this is a snapshot of a moment in time, and that things will all adjust and straighten out. And we will see if their prediction is correct.
Yeah, the EU is engaged in its own trade war with Donald Trump. They put a 50% surcharge on US whiskey exports, and now Trump's threatened to impose 200% tariffs on wine and champagne exported from the European Union.
Yeah, I mean, he did this during Trump 1 with the president. I mean, with France. I mean, this is a classic Trump move.
Yeah, look, I mean, of course, you've got lots of producers in Europe up in arms about this, but it is one of those things, especially with Donald Trump, that you have to sort of believe it when you see it rather than just the threat of it. But that was what he strode onto Truth Social to post this afternoon in a sort of fit of anger. We know that he's got issues with imports of cars into the United States from the EU and much more besides. Let's talk about a Russian ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Donald Trump, we heard from him this afternoon with this message for Vladimir Putin.
At this moment, we have people talking in Russia. We have representatives over there, Steve Witkoff and others, and they're in very serious discussions. As you know, Ukraine has agreed, subject to this, what's happening today, to a complete ceasefire, and we hope Russia will do the same. The billions of dollars is being spent and really wasted so unnecessarily. It should have never happened. We know where we are with Ukraine, and we are getting good signals outside of Russia as to where we are with Russia, and hopefully they'll do the right thing. It's really humanity. We're talking about humanity. We're not talking about the money, but then you add the money to it, and, hundreds of billions of dollars is being spent and really wasted so unnecessarily. It should have never happened.
What is the general consensus over there, Anita, about what Steve Witkoff might come back with? He's in Moscow meeting with Vladimir Putin.
That is a great question that Trump did not answer, but he did allude to some agreements over how land would be apportioned as part of a peace deal. And also he mentioned a large power plant in Ukraine as being central to this deal. I don't know if he means the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station or some other facility. I wouldn't want to guess. But there are tangibles and deliverables in this agreement that he seems to think have been ironed out. It's not clear whether Witkoff will come back with these, because I think that his interpretation also of Putin's response was, I mean, it was a glass half full, glass half empty situation. You could read it either way. Putin basically said, yeah, the idea in principle is good, but there are some problems. The problems that we know that Putin has, the objections that he has, rather, are he doesn't want European peacekeepers in Ukraine. And the objections from the Ukrainian side, who have tentatively accepted a ceasefire proposal, are that they want security guarantees. And these 2 points, I think, these are going to be very difficult to iron out. And then analysts we have spoken to today have told us over and over again, just remember Russia's history with ceasefires. They tend to break them over and over and over and over again. So, I mean, it's really hard to say how this is going to play out and how both sides are kind of using these discussions to try to angle for the things that they want and they need, and also to pursue their aims on the ground.
Sure. Look, it must be a minefield dealing with the White House at the moment, Donald Trump, the new regime, YouTubers, TikTokers front and centre, as well as the more traditional news mediums. Donald Trump met with the Irish Prime Minister yesterday. This is what happened to a colleague of yours at Voice of America.
And Jewish people can live side by side. And I've met with people, parents of children who were killed on both sides, called Parents Circle in Israel. And they work to try and bring people together. It's difficult work.
What about the president's plans to expel Palestinians out of Gaza? Are you discussing that with him and giving him your...
Nobody's expelling any Palestinians. I don't know. Who are you with?
I'm with Voice of America, sir.
Oh, no wonder. Okay, Voice of
I mean, that was your colleague Carrie Lake, wasn't it?
No.
Oh.
It was not. Carrie Lake is is in a different capacity at the U.S. Agency for Global Media.
Oh,
she's not a reporter at the agency. But yeah, I mean, Trump does enjoy having a combative exchange with reporters. This is not the first time. This is not the second time. This is not even the third time.
She wasn't making it up, was she? She wasn't making it up at all. It was a completely fair enough question. And yet he's completely denying it.
I mean, he reacts to these questions in very strong ways. And as I said, this is not the first time he's done this to a journalist. He does enjoy the combative questions, but this is part of his MO and part of his reaction, very honestly, to being asked questions that he perceives as being, you know, for whatever reason, questions he might not want to answer, questions he does not like. So, I mean, I think this is pretty classic Trump, and it was definitely a tense moment. It was definitely an interesting moment, and of course, the situation in Israel and in Gaza is of huge importance in the news, and it's always worth asking the American president about that. So, in that sense, I mean, this was a completely valid line of inquiry. You know, the president should expect, and he does expect, in fact, to be asked difficult questions in the Oval Office, even in front of foreign dignitaries.
Yeah.
This happened with Biden. This happened before Biden. So, I mean, this is just a style issue fundamentally.
And this is the new way of working. If you're a White House journo, this is the new way of working. And look, it's I certainly watch sometimes and sort of, you know, cringe at what happens. But I guess this is on you guys to try and make the most of it and try and work out how you do work with Donald Trump.
Sure. But it's really interesting to see this all playing out in public. And I think that is ultimately a service to the American people who are able to see this happen in front of them. And then they can look at his reaction, they can look at the questions, and they can make that determination for themselves.
Yeah,
which,
very true.
I mean, if people make the time to do that, that is the problem, of course. When Trump speaks for 51 minutes at a time, a lot of American people have other things to do for those 51 minutes. They rely on the news media of all types to summarize it.
And it depends where they get that from, of course. Anita, really good to speak to you. Thank you for letting us run that by you.